Well, systems changes are really reflections of really what's going on in people, ultimately, because systems are living their policies through people. And if the people haven't fundamentally changed, you're putting unchanged people into a new system, which will then reflect where people are actually at. So the fundamental challenges with systems change are actually people change. And that's a long-term process typically. It's usually underestimated. And if we don't kind of deal with the values issues and the commitment issues and the insight issues, then we won't be able to optimize any new option, whether it's individual funding, self-direction, or something else. I think the investment in capacity building is always underestimated, and how long it takes people to adjust to new realities. Now, there'd be many people that adjust very quickly, but the average person or the majority of people take a lot more time to get their head around things and to really make it their own. So in this sense, often people will talk about change as really generational. It takes a generation to get many changes fully kind of taken hold. And you can see this again. We got people out of institutions, but we've had trouble getting the institutions out of people. All change is personal, ultimately, because if you can't get one human being to do it, you can't get 100. Each human being has to make their contribution, and if they're not willing to personally change, then they'll say, "Oh, well, the system should change." But I'm steady as she goes. I'll just sort of do what I've always done, and that's what you see after a lot of these changes is talk of change, but really the same old, same old. Well, I think people quickly adopt slogans and things of that sort without much really definition to what they are. And so therefore when they go to do something with them, it's all kind of vague and, a bit like inclusion. What do you do with inclusion? Well, it's so poorly defined that it's very hard to know when you're doing it or you're not in that sense. So I think a lot of this is a huge educational challenge of getting people to get more and more precise about what things mean and therefore what we should actually be doing. So that's really partly the unpacking of key kind of ideological or other objectives. The second is consciousness raising. There's a huge amount of things people need to be conscious of or mindful of. And consciousness raising is really decades of work, because consciousness is the first thing to be lost, and all this talk these days of mindfulness is very mindful of that when people are mindful, they do much better with anything. So it's kind of making people mindful so that it becomes part of what they're paying attention to. The third thing is nothing changes without alliances. You really need allies, and finding your allies makes it possible for change to happen. And of course, at the biggest level, that constitutes social movements. It's all kinds of people going roughly in the same direction who may not even know each other, but are part of a bigger movement. But those alliances allow you to deal with the opposition that you're going to get and, organize to act as one to some extent. The other thing I think to draw attention to is people need to see what's being talked about in the form of good examples, because the good example concretizes all the philosophy, so in a sense the example's emblematic, and that's how kind of people get it. They see it lived out in a small example often, but kind of riveting, because it can say, well, there are apples here and there are oranges there, and I can tell there really is a difference between the orange and the apple now. But if you've never seen the orange, you may not even believe it's possible to have something quite different. So examples help the credibility of the claim that we can do something different. Of course, the last thing to mention is leadership. But people tend to think of leadership again as somehow the person at the head of the parade, when in fact leadership that matters is largely collective. And collective leadership involves different types of leadership. People taking the lead, but in quite different ways, but in sync with each other to some extent. And people tend to think of leadership more individualistically rather than a mix of leadership all making contributions, because that's really what you want. You want people taking the lead, but on the kind of leadership that they are suited to do. It is important to recognize that leadership that is visionary is decisive, that can see that, because when you can see it, you're closer to being able to do that. And a lot of leadership doesn't happen because people don't see it. They don't see, oh, we could do that way. And so in this sense, I think they, almost like thought leaders that are in kind of leadership roles, can create a vision for what it could look like, even if it's going to take, decades or whatever to get there. Well, it is fundamental because the families are in it for the long haul. They have standing. They can block things if they don't agree with it, so they might hold off on progressive things. So, and families are more likely to do something than professionals. Why? Well, because they have a family member. And that's, so that's what they're going to do. And of course, people, self-advocates, it's their life, so they have a very, very big vested interest. And there's been all kinds of investments in what might be thought of as family values, vision, and leadership. For instance, Alberta's had a family leadership initiative for 25 years or something. Massachusetts, where I live, has had family leadership series in each of their regions, going back to at least 25 years. And so thousands of families have been to these as kind of a shot in the arm and vision building and so on, and also very helpful for networking. There's been pretty good investment in supporting people first type organizations in a lot of places, in many countries. In fact, we didn't really have a movement 25 years ago, and now people first type groups, and part of that process has been strengthening their capacities, recognizing their leadership, giving them opportunities like these conferences and things like that are really interesting for them. So yes, but again, are people mindful of how important that could be and how valuable it could be? And service providers tend to think the world revolves around service provision, whereas the world of families and people with disabilities isn't about service provision, it's about living.